All right, welcome everyone to our webinar today. We are pleased to have so many of you here joining us for a joint webinar with Alluvionic, Forvis Mazars, and Arc Cyber. Our intent today is to really dig into findings from a recent C3PAO survey. So here at Alluvionic in the spring, we conducted a survey of small businesses related to CMMC, and we published a report. Our kind of next phase was to get insights from the certified third-party assessment organizations of what's going on with CMMC, what they're seeing. They truly are on the front lines working with businesses, understanding what companies are expecting from CMMC and having the opportunity to work firsthand with those organizations. So we conducted a survey in July, and this session today will be unpacking the findings from that survey. We will talk about some of the trends that the C3PAOs are seeing right now and get some real world insights from a couple of certified third-party assessors who are actively working in this environment. So really looking forward to going over those findings, getting those hot takes from our panelists, and certainly we will have time for Q&A from the audience at the end. So just from a logistical standpoint, you are all muted right now, but we do have a Q&A feature. So if you look at the top of your screen, you should be able to see a Q&A feature in there. So feel free to post any questions as they come to mind, and our intent will be to dig into those questions at the end. And if there is anything that we miss, we will certainly circle back with you to get you those answers. I'd like to start by introducing our panel. So since I'm talking, I'll tell you who I am. So I am Elizabeth High. I oversee our commercial services here at Alluvionic. Alluvionic is a cyber accreditation body registered practitioner organization, an RPO, and we have been working in the cyber ecosystem with the CMMC world since 2020. I am joined, as I indicated, by a couple of certified third-party assessment organization representatives today. So I will kind of go through and do just a quick intro, and then I will turn it over to them to tell you a little bit more about them. So first, on your screen, you can see there, I'm joined by Caitlin Pasego. She's one of my colleagues here at Alluvionic. She oversees internal IT, but she also is working alongside clients, helping them prepare for CMMC. I'm also joined by Tom Tollerton, Forvis Mazars. He's Principal IT Risk and Compliance, and Darius Carr with Arc Cyber, pricing analyst there at Arc Cyber. So I will start with Darius.
Hello, everybody. My name is Darius Carr. I've been a pricing analyst in GovCon for about 5 years now. I am the head pricer at a government contract company known as Bravura. So at the end, you actually will see my contact. I normally use that email for all my business, but we also have a C3PAO side. It's Arc Cyber. I am taking on every customer call, going through the effort of getting proposals out. So I'm seeing everything as far as pushbacks are concerned, and I'm seeing the wins and not necessarily the losses, but the pain points of the OSCs in the process of getting prepped and ready for their assessments.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Darius. So, such perfect insight as we dig into our survey findings and what C3PAOs are, of course, seeing in the marketplace. I'll turn it over to you, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Lizzie. But Tom Tollerton, I'm a principal or partner in Forvis Mazars. I'm the leader of our CMMC and C3PAO practice. We were one of the early authorized C3PAOs back in 2022, and I've been working in joint surveillance voluntary assessments and some of the earliest level 2 assessments as well, but really been working with NIST 80171 since 2017 under the original DFARS rules. So we've got a pretty solid and experienced team kicking off these assessments now that we're full bore with the 32 CFR rule and just now waiting for the 48 CFR rule. So appreciate being here.
Awesome, thank you. And Caitlin.
Thank you, Lizzie. Hi, I'm Caitlin Pasego, IT Manager and Cybersecurity Compliance Analyst at Alluvionic. I am a U.S. Navy veteran with a background in leadership, risk management, and operational security, developed 3 years of experience in both the military and private sector environments. At Alluvionic, I help lead our internal governance, risk, and compliance efforts while also supporting clients as they prepare for and align with some of these key cybersecurity frameworks. So I'm excited to be here today to share insights and lessons learned from across both the defense and commercial sectors.
Thank you so much, all of you. So we definitely have the right voices in the room to help us unpack these findings. So when we were putting this panel together, we really thought it would be fun to get these like real insights based on the questions that we asked the C3PAOs in our survey. So in some cases, we may find that there's complete alignment, and in other cases, we might see that there's some differences. So when we talk about CMMC, the rule was final effective in December. So this is all very, very new. And the C3PAO formal assessments really started February timeframe. And the environment out there is just growing and changing as we move through this. So I'm excited to get your insights as you are dealing with these companies that are preparing for CMMC, as you're dealing with these companies that are going through these assessments. So I think we're going to have a good discussion today. So without further ado, my approach here today is really just going to be going through the survey findings and then getting insight. So here's what the survey said. What do you guys see in your actual real world experience? So starting with readiness. So kind of a readiness reality check. What is it that our survey uncovered with regard to what the certified third-party assessors are seeing as they're starting to engage in the process of conducting these formal level 2 assessments? So our findings were that about half of the C3PAOs that participated said that there were delays or they were having to turn away companies almost half of the time, about 50% of the time, because they just were not ready. So I'm interested to see, as you are having those intake calls, Darius and Tom, as you're engaging with customers, and Caitlin as well, as you're helping companies on the readiness side. Is this finding surprising? What do you see in your experience? What do you think it is that may be causing companies to not quite be ready? So I'll start with Darius. You take all these phone calls and talk to these companies.
Okay. So I would definitely say maybe a lack of resources to prepare for the exams. Sometimes you'll get like an IT guy or a cyber guy that's taking the lead because their leadership said, hey, we need CMMC. They're not necessarily focused on the CMMC process, but obviously they're familiar with the IT environment. And what I'm finding is people they're spread thin already. And so they're not hyper focused on actually getting prepped for the exam. I'm also seeing that they're not necessarily utilizing the right resources. So if you do have an IT guy who's already, doing his daily tasks, he's not really going to have time. That's where MSPs can come in, or I guess ESPs, external service providers, that can help fill that gap. And I just don't think enough companies are taking that avenue. I think a lot of them are thinking they can do it themselves. And to me, it looks like it's being a hindrance.
Yeah, that's really good insight. Tom, how about you?
Yeah, I kind of agree. We're very early, I think, is some of the challenge. 50% is a little high. I don't know if we responded quite to that high, but there are certainly situations where we have to say, no, you're not ready, but let's stay in touch, or let's schedule it further out, as opposed to no, just go figure it out. But I do think part of it is just the newness of it. So we're all pioneers here in CMMC. There obviously is the 800-171 framework and guidance around it. But how everything gets implemented, there isn't necessarily a lot of published or easily available sort of case studies, or what does perfect look like? What does great look like? And every organization is different too. So I think it just kind of comes down to a dialogue. I think it is smart to reach out to a C3PAO as early as you feel comfortable and have the honest dialogue, and hopefully they're helpful to you. But I will say that, yeah, there are a number of scenarios whereby it makes sense to push off, because you don't want to go through this process and have a failed assessment that's we've had to do that once or twice, and it's not a fun feeling for anybody. So certainly want to be prepared.
For sure, for sure. Caitlin, in your experience, you're helping companies with getting ready. What are some of the things you might see a company that maybe they're overlooking so that they don't necessarily realize they need to be doing, or might be surprised they would get pushed back if they were talking to a C3PAO?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very common for organizations to believe that they're more ready than they really are. And I think coming from the phase where everyone was just doing a self-assessment on themselves to now working with external companies, that's a big leap. So I would say we most often see a gap between the technical implementation and then actual compliance. So maybe a company realizes that all of their CUI devices need to be MFA enabled. But that's not something that's widely enforced across the organization. I would say documentation as well is another potentially huge blind spot, because you can have all of these security controls in place, but unless you have some formally documented policy behind it, then how are you really proving that this is what the company is stating must be in place? So I would say those couple of areas are pretty commonly overlooked prep steps.
Awesome. So there's kind of two sides to the coin when it comes to the companies getting scheduled to conduct an assessment. One is from that certified third-party assessor standpoint, you're having those conversations and sort of determining whether or not they might be ready and that you want to schedule them. On the flip side, companies are often delaying when they want to get that certification process started and scheduled. And according to our survey, about 80% of C3PAOs have experienced certain circumstances when they're talking to these potential candidate companies that they're just delaying it. They're saying, hey, I think I'm pretty ready, but I can't really validate how or what I've done so far. I'm just going to kick the can down the road. What do you think have you seen that? And what do you think is really kind of behind that process? We did hear a couple of other things. We heard that there were some budget constraint issues. So some companies are citing that as a concern, and that's why they're delaying. And then we've also heard some were just really still, Caitlin mentioned self-attestation. They think that's just good enough for now. So kind of what do you hear for the companies that have the conversation with you, but then decide they're just not going to take action yet? So Tom.
Yeah, I'll start there. We have had a couple scenarios where I think there's been this mad scramble, so to speak, with some companies just to make sure that they do get in touch with the C3PAO, which does make sense. But then as they get through the process, they sort of realize, well, we may not need to do it right away. And then they end up pushing it off. And it's a little frustrating, I think, for all parties to kind of have to go through that, because it does impact our schedules from the assessment side. I don't think it's anything nefarious, but it's really just the idea that, hey, we got to get through this, but then reality sets in a little bit. Hey, the panic calms down that self-assessment is the requirement for the first year. Yes, there will be a tight bottleneck with C3PAOs, but we've started the conversation now. We've put together a roadmap, a game plan. We can get through the self-assessment right now, and maybe we can do our full assessment sometime early next year. We don't have any other pressure from our primes or anybody else. We can probably maybe do it sometime next year instead of trying to get it crammed in this year. So I think it's just having a dialogue with a trusted partner that knows what they're talking about in terms of what the expectations are, what the availability is, I think is really what helps kind of bring the sense of calm to the whole conversation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Darius, when you're talking to customers, how about you? Are you seeing similar types of discussions going on?
Yeah, I would say, from what I've seen for delays, it's really just being unorganized. I think a lot of companies are thinking, okay, we can kind of get this ready last minute. Let's say you're on the schedule for next week. Companies are scrambling, before, maybe a week or so before the actual assessment. Whereas, when you go see a C3PAO, maybe you don't have everything 100% together, but we were really hoping and expecting that you're about 95% of the way there. We've gotten to the point where we've implemented a phase 0 before we even move into phase 1. That way we're not getting to phase 1 and realizing you guys are not ready, your documentation is not squared away, maybe something looks wrong in your SSP. We just want to avoid as many delays as possible, because we're seeing that we're getting to phase 1 and companies might adjust their scope. They might change their environment because they're making last minute changes, thinking that it's going to help, which it probably will help them pass. But the issue is, if you're doing it now, we now have to go back in and look through your documentation, which then delays the assessment, and that's more costly to you, because we've had to implement a cancellation or a delay clause, which, from my understanding, that's starting to become an industry standard because of unorganization and not OSCs not being ready yet.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And it just kind of piggybacks the, like, there's times when you're maybe telling them that they need to regroup a little bit, and then there's times that they're maybe making their own last minute decisions to regroup, and it's impacting the ability to move forward. You talked about some of the gaps. So we did have that as part of the survey. What are the common gaps in readiness? And we did see tons of alignment in a few areas. So scoping was a very common gap. And Darius, you talked about the changing it in real time. Missing or incomplete system security plan, which is your core to this whole process. Incomplete external service provider documentation. So those are the top. So just really kind of not having a handle on scoping, the SSP not being where it needs to be, and then not having the proper documentation for any of those external service providers, cloud service providers, those kinds of things. So what are you seeing? Does that align with what you see? Are there some other areas that you think are also sort of glaring challenges? But what's the common experience that you have out there? And actually, Caitlin, I might start with you, because I know you're working with companies on this component.
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, most definitely what you just mentioned. Our most frequently encountered gaps are probably scoping, and then operational evidence as well. I think a lot of clients don't realize how crucial that early scoping is, because then if you can't clearly define your CUI environment, the rest of the prep work that you're doing becomes very chaotic. And then in addition to that, I would say there's the challenge of your evidence maturity. So clients may not have logs or user activity records that have been retained long enough to help demonstrate that sustained compliance. So just even less specific to some of the points you made, that in a general sense, having the evidence and the maturity of that evidence are both quite critical and very common gaps that we see on our side.
Yeah, awesome. How about you, Tom?
I would agree. I mean, I think it comes down, scoping is always the number one concern, and we work very hard to make sure that gets addressed early before we even get started on the readiness review. But documentation, absolutely, the system security plan. And then, the system security plan obviously is the crux document. Sometimes we encounter some issues where the system security plan will reference another document. It'll reference a third-party shared responsibility matrix or a supporting policy procedure that isn't there or isn't accurate, isn't up to date, which can sometimes cause some problems. And then there's little things sometimes that come up. So incident response plan testing. I think we had a client that had to go the POAM route for that. Things like vulnerability scanning and making sure that those match up between the system security plan and what actually occurs in reality. So just making sure that the documentation is accurate and complete and approved. Those are typically the stumbling blocks, I think, that we see.
Yeah. Darius, similar?
Yes, and I would say just from an initial client call, OSC call, I would say maybe a I don't want to say misrepresentation, because I don't think anybody's trying to get the runaround on us in initial calls, but maybe a misunderstanding of their, as you guys are saying, the scope. For instance, we asked for how many locations are handling CUI. We need cage codes, and I'm not going to call anybody out, but we were under the impression, literally going into yesterday's meeting, that we had to go to one location. We had an update, and it's over 10. I also received another email where somebody, there was a misrepresentation in their cage codes. It went from 10 to 30. So really having a true understanding of your environment, what truly is being assessed, it's very important, because it's just going to cause delays. It's wasting everyone's time. We're lining up resources. You're lining up time on your schedule. And obviously you have the idea of, hey, we're going to be done by X date. Well, we can't do that if you're not ready. So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, that aligns pretty well with a comment that you made earlier about really having the right people on the project. So having the right leader that's kind of central to your team on the internal side of the company pursuing that certification, that they've got the right people that have true ownership, that really understand what's entailed, what the scope is, what all the players are. And that kind of leads into another one of our survey questions, was on staff preparedness. So we were looking at, hey, how ready are the stakeholders that you're assessing through this process? Because you are not just talking to one person. You're not just talking to an IT lead or an operations lead. You've got really a team of people that are subject matter experts in specific areas that have to be in scope for this assessment. According to our survey findings, only 25% of the C3PAOs really believed that staff were typically well prepared. They felt like they just didn't really understand maybe what the CMMC program was within their company, or maybe what their role was within the CMMC program. As you are interfacing with companies, what are you seeing in the boots on the ground assessment week, where you're actually having those interactions directly with individuals? So Tom, you've probably done this a time or two.
Yeah, it's kind of hit or miss. I mean, sometimes I will say the earlier ones that we've done, I think it's sort of been all hands on deck with the teams over on the OSC side, and so those have been fairly smooth. Kind of late, there have been a couple of circumstances where we don't have the right control owner on a particular call, and it's organizational based. Sometimes it's about the personality of the organization, really, where you'll have some project managers who kind of drive the CMMC initiative, and they want to play middleman between the control owners and the assessors. And so they're on all the calls to walk through control families like access control and authentication and incident response, and they may not have all the right answers. And so we've kind of had to really reiterate the importance of having the actual control owners, operators, if you will, on the calls to walk us through, because we haven't talked about the assessment process here, but the DIV-CAC methodology, which is what we follow, is very observation and walkthrough heavy. So we actually want to see the implementation and operation of what you define in your system security plan in production. We want to see it working. So that's why those calls and those walkthroughs are so important during that week, and making sure that we've got the right people on the call. So we've tried to reiterate that and make sure that it's clear that we've got the right people on the call.
Yeah, that's really good point. And I love that you shared a little bit about it, because I think that's important for our audience to understand too, is what is it? What does it really look like, that assessment week? So we talked about kind of on the front end, where there's the intake conversations, and we're trying to determine the scope, and we're collecting the evidence and the documentation. We're taking a look at it. But then in assessment week, we really want to see it in practice, and we want to understand how people are operating within this environment. And that's where this comes into play, is how prepared are your control owners? How much do they truly understand what needs to be done, and are they actually doing those things? And then circle back, does it align with what's written down? So it's all connected back there. What do you think that the organizations seeking certification could do differently to better prepare for those interviews, for those demos? Are there things that they could be doing now?
Absolutely. For our part, what we've tried to do is in our intake documentation and request lists and our project management effectively is we've tried to make it clear, here are the things, it's all in the guidance, but just to put it in our project workbooks, just here are the things that we are going to talk about during these conversations. We need to make sure that the people that can speak to this are on these particular calls that we have scheduled, and we block off hours during the week to talk about each of the control families. So we make sure that we've got the right people on the call. For our part, that's what we've tried to do is just to make it clear. Here are the topics. You talk about access control, well, that can mean a lot of different things. We try and make it clear exactly what it is we're going to be talking about.
Perfect. Caitlin, in your world, it's probably strong fit for you because you're helping on the front end, getting people ready. How do you prepare the client's team for this type of interface with the certified third-party assessor?
Well, I will say that I think this very often is an underestimated part of CMMC readiness. People and companies think that once they hand over all the documentation to their chosen C3PAO, they're done, right? And so understanding that there will be an interview process, there will be process walkthroughs, and then going back to all of these people who have taken the ownership of the controls and doing some sort of mock interview and simulating what the assessors might ask to make sure that everyone, from your system administrators to your human resources department really understands their role is truly key with all of it. And I would say a big part of our job coming in as that third party is that we're translating the compliance speak into operational reality. So we're helping to coach staff on how to speak confidently about the controls that they manage and how to share that evidence, whether it's live systems or click-throughs and screen shares, because sometimes saying something is in place, isn't enough without the proof.
Hey, yeah, absolutely. That's great. Darius, any additional comments on that?
I think you guys hit it for the most part. I don't think I really have too much to add to that. It just kind of goes back to us implementing that phase 0 to make sure that OSCs are properly prepared moving forward, because we just don't want to waste anybody's time.
Perfect. So C3PAO assessments for CMMC level 2 are happening. It's real. And I think there still is some people out there that might not believe it's really happening yet, because as Tom kind of mentioned, the DFARS clause that enforces CMMC isn't yet finalized. So they can't put it in our contracts just yet, because we're still waiting on those final details with the new DFARS clause with the 48 CFR. But one of the things that we wanted to kind of baseline with this survey was, what's it look like out there? How active is the assessment process? And we found that really most C3PAOs are already kind of nearing or passing double-digit assessments since this all started back in February. So there are assessments happening, and the timelines for those assessments are increasing. So looks like most companies, again, are nearing in the 10 range for completing assessments. Some are still maybe a little bit lighter, but 4 to 6 months is a pretty average timeline to sign your contract and schedule out your assessments. We did find it pretty interesting. There were a number that had availability within a 3-month period. And I think there's probably a number of drivers for that. And part of that is we talked about rescheduling and those kinds of things. So there might be some gaps that show up in the short term, and companies might be just more confident about scheduling out 6 months versus scheduling out next week. So what are you seeing? How frequent? I know you're interfacing with other C3PAOs. What is the volume you're seeing, and what are the timelines you're seeing out there?
Yeah, I'll start. Well, the good news is they continue to authorize new C3PAOs. The Cyber AV does. I think we just had a couple in the last couple of weeks, 2 to 3. So that opens up. Now that they're officially authorized, they can schedule formally schedule their assessments with clients. So that's good, because we are going to have that ecosystem bottleneck. But I think for most of the C3PAOs that have been around for a while, I know that their schedules through the end of this year are pretty tight. There are pockets of availability kind of opening up, as we talked about. Some clients push off a little bit, maybe into next year. That opens up a window here and there on schedules. And then there are a number of clients that just are perfectly content with working in January, February, and trying to do it in that timeline too. There really is no need to go do it here in December, by December, so to speak. The bottleneck is really at the assessor level too. So I mentioned the C3PAOs are getting authorized, but the certification process for the assessors is a slow process due to a background check with the federal government called a Tier 3 suitability determination. It's a very light background check, but has to be done in order to participate in these CMMC assessments. And we keep seeing that assessor number trickle higher instead of shooting higher. A lot of people are taking the training, taking the tests, but they can't participate until they get through that background check. So until that bottleneck clears, we'll continue to kind of see tight timelines in the 3 to 6 month out horizon, if you will.
Yeah, and maybe could you underscore just a little bit more about that in terms of how many assessors are needed to be part of this team, kind of help people understand that?
Absolutely. And that was one change from the proposed 32 CFR rule into the final 32 CFR rule that we really weren't expecting. And so the requirement was going to be for one CCA to conduct an assessment, and then another CCA do the QA work, the quality review of the original or of the assessor's work. So that was 2 assessors per assessment. If you think about it, maybe in a week timeline, let's call it the assessment week, that would take 2 CCAs that week. The final rule required 2 CCAs to participate in each assessment, plus that other QA CCA makes a 3rd QSA. So that further restricted the bottleneck and the availability within the pool of CCAs to conduct these assessments. Sort of tightens the ability up to do that. But it's a 6 to 8 week end-to-end process. You can probably juggle a couple of assessments at a time as a CCA, as long as the actual assessment week or 2 doesn't overlap with any other ones. But that's really the bottleneck, is just that number of available CCAs.
Right. Perfect. Darius, what do you see on your side in terms of volume and the kind of that scheduling backlog? Are you seeing bottlenecks start to form?
Yeah, and I'm taking customer calls all the time, every week. And what I've noticed recently is you're seeing a lot of customers saying, "Hey, can I get in at the end of the year?" And I'm just like, "No, we are not available. We are pretty much booked up." Or I think we have space maybe for one more in December, but we're talking to multiple OSCs at a time that are trying to secure those spots. So we've actually been taking deposits as a way of saying, all right, we can get you on the schedule, but you get a deposit in, you're going to save that date. What you might see is with delays, you might actually be able to sneak in and actually take someone's spot, which would be ideal if you're trying to, rush in. What we're kind of afraid of is you're going to see a firestorm of OSCs saying, "Oh, we need to get this done starting, let's say, in Q1," but people are going to be booked up until maybe June. But yeah, we're seeing about the same. It's about 3 to 6 months backlog, and then I just have a ton of people that are saying they're going to be ready for Q1, and I just think it's going to be a firestorm of people trying to get on the schedule, and they're just not going to be able to in a timely manner.
For sure. And I know that we see that as well. And often when we're talking to companies on the readiness side, there's a little bit of an underestimation of the time it takes to get that system security plan in a state that is ready, and to ensure that you've got the documentation that is relevant and demonstrates that experience level. So we'll hear kind of on the front end this desire to kind of get ready in a very short time frame and then get that certification immediately thereafter. So I wouldn't be surprised if I took a call tomorrow and they said, "We want to start today and get certified by December."
Yep.
And we've never done it before. So that is something that I know Caitlin has been part of as well. And in fact, Caitlin's even been invited by a C3PAO to join a call with a customer because that C3PAO felt like they needed to get some advice. And as that certified third-party assessor, you're not really supposed to give them all the advice. So you can bring in a consulting partner in to maybe give them a little bit of advice to point them in the right direction. And that kind of brings me to another element of our survey, which was the role of consultants, registered practitioner organizations, CISOs, any sort of entity that is coming in to help that organization prepare for the CMMC level 2 certification, eventual certification process. And we sort of asked, first of all, just baselining, how many organizations are you seeing out there that are relying on a third party? And it was about 50-ish% that were relying on a third party in some way. And then we asked the other question is, what's the impact there? Is it a help or is it a hindrance? And the answers were all over the board. So it was slightly more positive than negative, but it really did range from having a consultant be part of this is very positive to having it be very negative. So kind of understanding that obviously not all consultants are created equal. We do have part of the survey that asks some open-ended questions, and we did get some nice, valuable kind of insight there, but it ranged all over the board of why the C3PAO sort of felt that way. So I'd love to get your take on what you see with regard to having third parties involved, providing consulting services to these companies and how it's impacting the overall process. So Tom, we'll start with you.
Sure, yeah, happy to. I think it kind of comes down to what the role and expectation is of the consultant. So, there's cloud service providers. I'm not sure if that's included in the list of the third parties that you mentioned, but I mean, having a FedRAMP moderate equivalent third party, cloud service provider, I think is probably helpful. I mean, it can minimize the scope and reduce the control operation burden and so forth. I think where we might get into a little bit of trouble on consulting and maybe it not being quite as helpful is if it's someone that really hasn't dealt with CMMC NIST 800-171, the control framework specifically, and what the expectations are. Maybe more of a general cybersecurity consultant. Maybe a smaller business sort of just trying to do something to help their client. And again, not anything that's a bad thing, but just may not be as valuable as you think they ought to be, or you expect them to be and want them to be. I think when experienced consulting firms, project management firms, companies that have helped organizations go through assessments and so forth are participating, that's usually very helpful to help guide the client into the right evidence, right control area, and so forth. But it kind of depends upon what the expectation is. I think maybe another bucket where we might get a little bit of trouble when we're relying on consultants is if it's sort of we can just build this for you and you don't have to do anything. Sort of, it's a one size fits all. We've got your documentation and we've got this template and it'll do the trick. And sometimes we see those template documents that get used and they're just not used effectively. They're not accurate. They're not complete. And so that's certainly unhelpful as well. But it really comes down to, what do you expect? Be realistic with the expectation for a consultant and someone to help you, and then make sure you're using someone that truly understands NIST 800-171.
Awesome. Thanks. Darius, how about you?
Well, Tom said everything. He didn't say everything I was going to say, but
sorry.
Now I was going to hit on, let's say you're using an MSP and they have, a template for you. You can't be overly reliant on your consultant. And what we are seeing is some OSCs are. We don't want to call anybody out once again, but we have seen a situation where the MSP wasn't quite aligned with the CMMC process. And because of that, it's delayed our OSC. And they are now dependent on their managed service provider to update their environment before actually moving forward with their own assessment. So I would definitely say if you need a third party, use them, but you still need to do your homework as well to prep You cannot just rely solely on them.
Yeah, that's right. Caitlin, what do you think makes a good consultant versus one that maybe isn't adding value to that project or to that customer?
Yeah, I'd have to say that, a good consultant is bringing experience, they're bringing structure, they're bringing realism, and they're not telling you what the controls mean, but they're helping you understand how to actually implement them within your environment. And I guess we could call them bad actors, but just companies that lack that experience, they're probably promising a quick fix, or pushing, like we just talked about, the canned SSPs or templates that don't reflect the actual practices that are happening. And that can create a false sense of security. So I would say the ownership factor that, we are coming in as a company here to assist you, but you have to own all of these things, because once we step away, or, once the audit has taken place and you're now certified, you're going to need to know what all of these controls mean and how they are applied within your environment, because this is a continuous program that you've now established. I would also say that artificial intelligence has a place in information technology, but it's not a consultant. And so we very often see that people are going to these resources that are openly available on the internet and thinking that their new best friend consultant is ChatGPT. And that is not something I would recommend by any means, because you're not getting that quality assurance check that you are with a real person, with a real company, who's an RPO that's gone through this experience before.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that. The additional context that we saw with the kind of open-ended questions, the C3PAOs had a lot of comments on this topic. So they really underscored watching out for something that sounds too good to be true. So if they're going to solve all your problems, if it's an easy button, watch out. And I think underscoring, I heard a couple comments about ownership, that you really have to own this. You can rely on a third party to help you, but at the end of the day, this is your program. You have to own it. You have to understand these consultants or third parties are there to help you and to help kind of push things forward. But at the end of the day, this is your program. So sounds too good to be true, probably is. Literally one of the answers on the survey was snake oil. So watch out for snake oil. So we see it across the board. I think, Tom, you mentioned, external service provider, cloud service provider, those kind of things. Sometimes people will believe that, and it's probably just the way they interpreted the marketing, but if I buy this tool or this solution, I'm now compliant. And we haven't found one of those yet. So if we find one of those, that would be very amazing. Some just lessons learned and advice. So what do you have there? What are some general lessons learned or advice that you would want to share with the organizations that are out there seeking certification? Tom, you're off mute, so we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to start. And I'll probably kind of expand upon something that Caitlin said. As we're talking about CMMC and building it. You're building this program. I think there's a slight risk of racing to get this certificate of status, as it's called, CMMC Level 2 certificate of status, getting it, and then just sort of forgetting about it from there, and not realizing that this is a 3-year certification life cycle with off-year self-affirmations that actually have to be recorded inside of the supplier performance and risk system. So it's really important that you build this as a sustainable program, ongoing, what we call business as usual controls, operations, things like vulnerability management and scanning and incident response testing and good processes for access control and access control reviews, just the things that good basic blocking and tackling from a cybersecurity standpoint anyway. But it's going to be really important when it comes time for the self-affirmation and for your next certification that you have actually been doing over the last 3 years what you started to do with that first certification. Otherwise, there could be some problems in kind of getting that certificate renewal. So I would just say have a charter, so to speak, and an owner of the CMMC compliance program, and make sure it's built to last.
Any other kind of advice points? And then we might just jump into some questions from our audience here. We do have a couple in the Q&A. Darius, do you have anything before Q&A?
Just, avoid shortcuts, be prepared. I think I don't want to say a lot, but I've seen OSCs maybe trying to be as budget friendly as possible, understandably so, because we're dealing with small and large companies. And for the smaller ones, I'd rather them take their time to make sure they're ready. And if you do have to go to a third party, I would recommend it. I'd rather you do that than, be unorganized and potentially delay this process over and over again. And the more you delay it, it just becomes more costly. So, maybe it's a short term, I don't want to say pain, but, short term hit to your budget, but in the long run, it's going to be helpful.
Right. No pain, no gain.
Right.
Caitlin, how about you? Any advice for our organizations seeking certification?
I would just circle back to understanding your scope. What systems, processes, where you're storing your CUI. If that's not nailed down early, then everything downstream from that can become problematic. So I would just hit back on that. Your SSP should be a living document, not a checkbox. So go to your scope, really understand that, really define it. And then from there, your documentation and SSP will be all that much easier.
Awesome. So in our survey, we asked this question of the certified third-party assessors, and a couple of the key lessons learned, advice they left behind were really validate that readiness early. So make sure that you truly are ready. Do mock assessments. So that circles back to earlier, how prepared are the staff members when they're going through this. So definitely encourage going through that process, put them in the hot seat, make them uncomfortable early so that when the certified third-party assessors in front of them, they're a little more comfortable, and definitely avoid easy button promises because it's not likely to pan out well for you. So we do have a couple of questions here in the chat. So I'll start with this one. How are we to resolve performing periodic scans of the network if only using MS Defender with continuous monitoring? So this one's a technical question. Do we have any technical people there? Caitlin came off mute.
I think that's me. I can probably take this. Yeah, so I would say there's a couple of ways to go about that. And really a lot of the controls, if you're having trouble kind of defining maybe that schedule or that defined period of time, you can always revert back to a policy in some sort of formal document that states that, these are going on at such interval. But I do believe that with Microsoft Defender, they have built-in scheduled scans. So you could also utilize that and refer back to the schedule within the platform to help keep up with that continuous monitoring aspect. And then also maybe just defining the different types of scanning, right? So if you are using Microsoft Defender as just your continuous real-time check, that's great. But maybe you could also be doing something on a less frequent basis that's a little more advanced, like hunting and threat analytics. And that would be on a monthly basis or even a quarterly basis. So I think just taking whatever platform you have in place and then coming up with some sort of schedule that can meet a couple different areas of requirement is kind of the best way to go about that. I hope that answers your question, Brian.
Thank you. We have another question about a tool. So I'm not sure if this is maybe thinking about a GRC type tool, but have you found an approved stats tool out there that administers the SSP and manages the 300+ controls and reporting for sustained compliance? if anyone's got a tool that they have seen or leveraged for that type of support.
There's a number of them out there, and I think that talking to a team member like yours probably have some recommendations. I mean, I think the key is the tool that helps, that is helpful. It's not just an evidence repository documentation retention tool. If it does help sort of manage the control operations, that's really critical. And administers the SSP. I'm not quite sure. Maybe that's where it's retained and that's where it can be updated. It's sort of stored up there. Maybe perhaps that's what that means. Yes, there doesn't really have to be, there's no certification around it. It doesn't have to be FedRAMP moderate equivalent or certified. So there's no expectation for that. There's a number of tools out there that can meet that requirement, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah. I think it sounds like it's probably a GRC tool, and there's definitely options that could be very useful to help take that burden off of just more of a manual internal solution. Another question about, is there 2 stages on level 2, self versus full implementation? And I don't know if that means self assessment versus full assessment, perhaps. I know. Yeah. And you mentioned that a little bit, Tom, about really in this initial rollout that self-assessment is going to be expected for a period of time. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, happy to. Yes, at level 2, there will be, there's 2 concepts here. There's the bifurcation of those contracts that will require a C3PAO assessment, and then there may be some significantly fewer contracts that allow a self-assessment moving forward. The C3PAO assessment isn't required. Now, for the initial rollout with the 48 CFR rule here expected in the next month or 2, the self-assessment will be all that's required for the first year. So the rollout schedule actually permits a self-assessment and does not require a C3PAO assessment. Once we hit 12 months after the release of that rule, then we'll start to see the expectation of having the C3PAO assessment with certificate of status completed. But again, there may be a couple of contracts that don't even require that, but I would not recommend anyone that's going to look for level 2 to assume that there'll be a self-assessment forever moving forward. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that sounded good. I think we maybe have time for at least one more question here is, in this case, the question I think is asking about a specific agency, but I think more broadly, is there a time frame when the DoD will start to reevaluate contracts based on SPRS score, based on what's posted in there? Is that what's going to happen when the final rule for the new DFARS clause comes out, and that's how it'll maybe be enforced a little bit? So the question was specifically about when DLA would start reevaluating enhanced validation based on the SPRS score, maybe voiding approvals if certain scores are not met.
Yeah, that I don't know. I'd have to dig into that. I mean, ultimately, the SPRS score won't even matter. The perfect 110 will be the expectation across the board. That's the only way to get the certificate of status ultimately. But I mean, in the shorter term, I'm not sure about when they might start reevaluating that. I can dig into that, but John, maybe we can take it offline if we want to dig into it.
Yeah. So one more question is just about this new C3PAO Advisory Council. So Tom, you were recently appointed to serve as the vice chair of this new council for the Cyber AD. Can you tell us just a little bit about what that council is?
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly was honored to do it. So the Cyber AB, or the CMMC accreditation body that manages the ecosystem of C3PAOs and assessors, has stood up an advisory council of 11, what they've called kind of executive members of existing authorized C3PAOs. And Scott Singer from Cyber9s is the chair, and I was appointed the vice chair. And effectively, what the expectation is, what the Cyber AB wanted to accomplish, is that they really want feedback from the C3PAO community on how to set some standards and consistent guidance in how these assessments are executed. So right now we don't really have a common body of knowledge, if you will, about interpretations of certain situations and whether certain tools meet one of the requirements, or how should a certain population be sampled, for example. There's no consistent sampling guidance. It's up to assessors' judgment right now. So what we really are expected to do on this council, we'll have a couple of committees that are involved in kind of helping set that guidance up, set that common body of knowledge. And we're not, it's an unpaid group. It's purely voluntary focused, and it's not policy setting. So we don't set anything official, but we provide recommendations for the Cyber AB to adopt in their guidance, principally the certification assessment process or CAP document that the assessors use. So it's really the idea is to get as many C3PAOs involved in the committees that then report into the council, that then provide the feedback to the AB, get as many as involved as possible so that we can be organized sort of in the way that we give feedback to the AB.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. It sounds like that's going to be really important in just standardizing things, making sure everybody's looking at it in the same way, so that companies will have a similar experience no matter what organization they're working with. I do want to just circle back through and tell everyone how they can find you and contact you should they be interested. I know we have a couple of slides on that. So just a reminder of Alluvionic, who we are. We're a project solutions company. This is a few of the various certifications and so forth that we have, but we are a cyber accreditation body registered practitioner organization, and we do focus on project management, process improvement, training, product development, government services, and cybersecurity. So I will underscore at the government services side, we feel your pain, all of you that are pursuing CMMC in your own right, because we too have a CMMC level 2 requirement within the other part of our business. So we suffer alongside you. We've been there ourselves. Tom, this is how you can get in touch with you. Anything additional you want to add?
No, I think my email address is right there. Feel free to reach out. Always happy to serve as a sounding board and answer questions. And you can Google us as well. We've got a website, obviously. So if there's anything that comes up, happy to chat, and certainly appreciate being here.
Right. Darius?
Thank you for having me. If you do have any questions, especially on, let's say, the initial call, please feel free to reach out. If you do have anything regarding the assessment, obviously I'm not an assessor, but we do have a team of assessors that are open to answering questions as long as they're not consulting, obviously.
Awesome. Thank you. And Caitlin, we didn't put your information out there, but we'll tell people how to find you. But you can reach out to find Caitlin as well. I do want to underscore, so we are publishing a report of our survey. So we talked about some of the findings today. You guys all got a sneak peek, but we're formalizing the actual document, the report document, and that should be coming out within the next week or two. So stay tuned. We will send it all your way. Any closing comments? Hearing none. Thank you all. Thank you so much to this panel. You guys were fantastic. Loved hearing all your feedback, and loved the questions from the audience as well. We appreciate everybody tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you.